I want to be clear about one thing before I tell you how I ended up living in Bay 11 Cordon for 3 weeks. I did not mean to sit down. That was not a strategy. That was not some instinct I had about the drift, or some handler technique I'd read about, or courage of any kind. I had been on my feet for 14 hours running cargo manifests for a mid-route freight surge. My right knee had been grinding since about hour 9, and when I ducked into Bay 11 Cordon to chase down a discrepancy on a pallet of sealed biologicals, I sat on the nearest flat surface because I was going to fall down if I didn't. The nearest flat surface happened to be a loading crate about 8 meters inside the bay door. The bay was not empty. I'd known the drift was in there. Everybody on Waystation Pellucid knew the drift was in there. That was why the door forced separate warning panels on it. Why Fauna Director Seth Varas had sent 3 separate handler teams in during the previous 4 days, and why all 3 handler teams had come back out again in under 12 minutes. The fastest in 9 minutes flat. Team lead refusing to discuss what exactly had precipitated their exit. The official incident logs used the phrase, containment-resistant behavioral clustering. The unofficial version, which I'd heard in the break room from a dock worker named Pelladara, who knew one of the handlers, was simpler. The drift moved at you like weather, and it didn't stop when you yelled at it. The drift was a multi-species holding problem that had started as a transit complication and metastasized into something the station's fauna division genuinely didn't have a protocol for. 3 species, juvenile range, all from different sectors of the freight manifest, had ended up sharing Bay 11 Cordon 6 days ago because of a routing error that had cascaded into a quarantine hold. The quarantine was precautionary and was almost certainly going to clear in another 48 hours. But until it did, you had Scareth juveniles, a vole cub, and a Thren juvenile in the same sealed bay, and that combination was not supposed to be survivable for the animals involved. The Scareth were reptilian. Juveniles ran knee-high on a human adult, armored in overlapping bone crest plates along their spine and shoulders, amber-eyed, built low and wide, and possessed of a snarl that sounded like a steel shutter being torn off its rail. There were 4 of them. In the wild, Scareth juveniles in a sibling cluster were pack hunters. They moved in synchronized bursts, communicated in subsonic pulses you couldn't hear but could feel in your back teeth, and were documented to coordinate on prey up to 8 times their combined body weight. The station's Scareth literature was very thorough on this point. There were 3 full paragraphs about the subsonic coordination in the fauna division onboarding materials, which I know because I read them later, after the fact, when I was trying to understand what had happened to me in Bay 11 Cordon. The Vol cub was canine-coated, dark-bristled, shoulder height on all 4s, chest like a barrel, and a head that seemed slightly too large for its body, the way a puppy's head is too large, except this puppy outweighed me by about 40 kilos and had double-jointed forelimbs that could reach forward almost a full body length when it extended them. The vole was a singular species in the holding logs, and its paperwork said it was 12 weeks into a 16-week juvenile window. Sounded young until you saw the teeth. There had been a note added to its file by the 3rd handler team. Does not respond to standard deterrent tones. Appears to treat tonal deterrents as curiosity objects. The Thren was the one that had unnerved the 1st handler team the most, based on the incident log. Insectoid, chitinous carapace with a crystalline quality that caught the light and scattered it in pale prismatic fans, roughly the size of a large domestic cat if the cat had 6 limbs, and could move any of them independently in directions a joint should not allow. The Thren clicked. It produced a dry, rapid, irregular clicking sound from somewhere under the forward carapace plates, and the clicking changed in tempo and pattern in ways that the Fauna Division's acoustic analysis had classified as communicative in function, unclassified in content. It weighed perhaps 8 kilograms. It had been found sitting on top of the largest Scareth the first time a handler entered the bay, which the handler had described in their log as deeply unsettling and not something I wish to repeat. All 4 Scareth, the vole, and the Thren were in Bay 11 Cordon when I sat down on the crate. I noticed them about 2 seconds after I sat down. My manifest tablet was in my hand, and I was looking at it, specifically at a discrepancy in the weight log for pallet 7 that didn't make sense. And then I looked up because something in the quality of the air in the bay had changed. Not a sound, exactly. More like a change in pressure. And there they were. The 4 scareth were arranged in a loose semicircle about 4 meters away, amber eyes very still, bone crest plates raised maybe 30%. The vol was slightly behind them and to the left, its too large head low, watching me. The Thren was on top of a support strut above and to my right clicking. I went completely still, not because I was calm, because I had used up all my capacity for quick movement about 4 hours earlier, and my body had simply stopped volunteering options. I sat on the crate with my manifest tablet in my hands and I looked at 6 predatory juveniles who were looking at me, and the only thing that went through my head, I am not proud of this, but it is accurate, was that I was going to die in a holding bay over a pallet. Weight discrepancy that probably turned out to be a data entry error. The scareth in the center of the semicircle took 1 step forward. I said, without thinking, easy. I don't know why I said that. I had no training with scareth or with any of the other species in that bay. I had 12 years of freight coordination and 8 years before that of dock work on 3 different stations. And in all of that time, the closest I'd come to fauna division work was signing off on transit manifests for animal cargo. I said easy the way you'd say it to a large dog that was approaching too fast because it was the only word that came out. The scareth stopped, gradually. It stopped mid-step, its forward foot still lifted, its amber eyes very fixed on me, and it stood there for a moment that felt much longer than it was. Then it lowered its foot, then it sat down. The other sat down. The vole folded itself down with a soft thump that I felt through the crate. The other 3 scareth settled one after another with a rustling of bone plate. The Thren's clicking slowed and went irregular, and then quieted. I sat very still for about a minute, waiting for something else to happen. Nothing happened. My knee was still hurting. Pallet weight discrepancy was still unresolved. I looked down at my manifest tablet and found the error, which was in fact a data entry transposition, corrected it, and looked back up. All 6 animals were still sitting. The scareth in the center was watching me, with what I can only describe as attentive patience. The vol had lowered its chin onto its forepaws. I stood up. The vol's head came up. The scareth rose to their feet. The Thren shifted on the strut, not threatening, oriented, like I had become a reference point, and they were adjusting to my position. I walked to the bay door, keyed it open, and walked out. I pulled up the fauna division comm code on my tablet and reported the manifest discrepancy, which was the actual reason I had gone in there, and said nothing about the drift, because I was not certain yet what I had experienced was real and not some kind of fatigue-induced hallucination. Then I went to the break room, sat down, and drank about half a liter of water, and tried to figure out what had just happened to me. I didn't figure it out that night. What I figured out that night was that my knee needed 2 more days of anti-inflammatory compound, and that the pallet 7 discrepancy had been causing a cascade error in 3 connected manifest logs that I was going to have to spend the morning untangling. I went to my bunk, slept 7 hours, woke up, and went back to work. It was midday the next day when Seth Varus walked into the freight coordination office with a data pad and a look on his face, like a man who has been handed a problem that is personally offensive to him. Varus was Fauna Division's station director, which on Waystation Pellucid was a mid-tier administrative role. He managed the transit handling for live cargo, the quarantine protocols, the documentation, and the contracted handler teams. He was tall, angular, precise manner of speaking that I associated with people who have spent their careers in institutions. Paperwork was the most powerful thing in the room. He had been on Pellucid for 11 years. He had opinions about containment protocols. He had, I would discover, opinions about the chain of authority within those protocols, which was why what happened over the next 3 days sat in him the way a splinter sits, technically manageable, but requiring attention at inconvenient moments. Oral, he said. I need to understand why you entered Bay 11 cordon last night. I told him about the manifest discrepancy, told me that Bay 11 cordon was under an active fauna advisory, that the warning panels on the door were not decorative, and that entering an active fauna advisory bay without fauna division authorization was a station code violation. I told him I was aware of that and that I apologized. He told me he had reviewed the bay surveillance footage and that he needed me to watch something. He put the data pad on the desk and played me 30 seconds of footage. Bay 11 cordon, looking down from the upper sensor array. Me coming in, sitting on the crate, the drift arranged around me, the semicircle, the settling, the vol's chin on its forepaws. Then me walking out. You were in that bay for 11 minutes, Varus said. I know. The third handler team was in that bay for 9 minutes before being driven out. The second team lasted 11 minutes, but spent 6 of those minutes pressed against the door. The first team lasted 12 minutes, and one of the handlers required medical review for stress indicators. I didn't know it was going to go like that, I said. I sat down because my knee hurt. Varus looked at me for a long moment. He had the manner of a man calibrating something, running a calculation in the back of his mind, and not fully liking the answer, but not yet willing. Discard it. I am bringing a fourth handler team in this afternoon, he said. I would like you to be available for a consult afterward, in case your experience offers any useful data. I told him I'd be available. The fourth handler team went in at the 14th hour, station time. I know because Varus sent me a comm notification, and because I was in the observation gallery above the bay by the time the team entered, partly out of curiosity, and partly because I'd finished my shift and had nothing else to do. The observation gallery was a narrow windowed walkway above 6 bays, used mostly by fauna division staff for monitoring during quarantine periods. There were 4 other people up there when I arrived. 2 fauna division technicians running sensor arrays, a VETH contractor named Seal who was documenting the quarantine for insurance purposes, and a short, wide-built alien from a species I didn't know who was apparently a colleague of Seal's and had come along to observe. We watched the handler team enter Bay 11 cordon. The team was 4 people, 2 with long-range tonal deterrents, 1 with a containment net rig, 1 team leader carrying a behavior assessment board and looking like she had read every available document on multi-species juvenile predator behavior, which I suspected she had. They spread out as they came in, took positions, and the team leader began the assessment protocol. Drift flowed. That was the only word for what happened. The 6 animals didn't charge, didn't snarl, didn't attack. They moved, together, in a fluid coordinated shift, so that within about 15 seconds they had repositioned to the center of the bay, and were arranged in a shape that was not quite a formation and not quite a cluster. The scareth were in front, low and wide, bone crest plates fully raised. The vole was behind and above them, its 2 large head up, watchful. The thren was somewhere in the back and I couldn't see it clearly, but I could hear it clicking through the gallery's audio feed, fast and irregular. The team leader raised her tonal deterrent. The drift came forward 2 steps. A statement. The team leader backed up 1 step. The drift came forward 1 more step. The team leader said something into her comm unit, and the team began a controlled withdrawal toward the door. They made it. They got out. Nobody was injured. But the handler team had lasted 6 minutes, and they had not gotten within 8 meters of any of the animals. Varus appeared in the observation gallery about 3 minutes after the team exited. He stood at the window and looked down at the bay for a long moment. The drift had settled again, the same loose attentive stillness I'd seen the 4 teams, Varus said, mostly to himself. They move like they're one thing, the VETH contractor Seal said from along the rail. I've been watching them for 2 days. They've never been still like that before. Not since the Scareth and the others were combined into that bay. Varus looked at the sensor data on the technician's board. When were they last fed? 6 hours ago, one of the technicians said. Feeding was uneventful. They accepted the feed without incident. When were they last active? They've been in low movement rest cycles since approximately the 20th hour yesterday. The technician paused. Approximately the time of the unauthorized entry. Varus turned to look at me. I was standing at the far end of the gallery rail, trying to be small, which is difficult when you are barrel-chested, and wearing a freight coordinator's orange oversuit. Since you entered the bay last night, Varus said. Seems like, I said. There was a silence in the observation gallery. The vet contractor seal was looking at me with an expression I was becoming familiar with, a very particular kind of attention that people on the station had started giving me. Since the surveillance footage had apparently made the rounds of the fauna division, I had not intended for the surveillance footage to make the rounds of the fauna division. But I had also not thought to ask anyone to keep it quiet, so here we were. Two of the scareth below shifted. They moved together, turning slightly, adjusting toward something. The vol's head came up. I realized with a delay that the adjustment was toward the observation gallery. Toward me specifically. Couldn't see me clearly through the window. The glass was rated for containment observation, not transparency. But something had registered. A vibration in the floor, maybe. The subsonic, Ferris would tell me later. The quarantine period ends in 36 hours, Varus said. At that point, the Skarath and the Vol transfer to their destination carriers, and the Thren goes to a research facility at Korath Outpost. Our obligation is to ensure they arrive in acceptable behavioral condition. 4 handler teams have been unable to conduct basic behavioral assessment. He paused. I would like to try something unorthodox. I had a sense, standing there in my orange oversuit, of the conversation's direction. No, I said. I would like you to enter the bay with a fauna division observer. Not to handle the animals, simply to be present while the observer conducts the assessment. I'm a cargo coordinator. I have no fauna handling certification. I'm aware of that. I went in there last night because of a manifest error. Whatever happened was an accident. I'm aware of that also, Varus said. I still would like you to consider it. I considered it for approximately 10 seconds. Below us, the lead Scareth had shifted fully toward the gallery window. It was looking up at the glass, with its amber eyes, and its bone crest plates were held. At a neutral angle, not raised, not flat. Attentive. What's the observer's name? I said. The observer's name was Dalla Ferris, a Fauna Division Senior Assessment Specialist, who had been brought to Pellucid specifically for the Scareth transit. They were the most complex of 3 species in containment terms, and Ferris had more hours with juvenile Scareth than anyone else on the station. She was compact, practical, with the easy, careful movements of someone who had spent a lot of time in close proximity to things that could hurt her, and had learned to make that proximity look unremarkable. We met outside Bay 11 cordon the following morning. Varus was there. So were the 2 Fauna Division technicians, and Seal the contractor, and Seal's colleague. All of them apparently now invested in the outcome, which made me feel publicly scrutinized in a way I found uncomfortable. Pelladara, the dock worker from the break room, had apparently also heard something was happening, because I spotted them in the corridor 30 meters down, pretending to check a manifest panel. Ferris looked at me steadily. You understand this is informal and undocumented as a formal handling protocol. I understand I'm a cargo coordinator who sat on a crate. That's accurate, she said. Do you want a briefing on the animals? I've read some of the onboarding material. What I'd like you to do, Ferris said, is enter the bay the same way you did the night before. Sit down somewhere. Don't make direct eye contact with the Skarath. They read extended eye contact as a challenge. Don't reach toward the Vol until it approaches you. The Thren will do whatever the Thren does. In my experience, they follow the Skarath's lead on social cues. And if they don't settle, then we leave, she said simply. We went in. I sat on the same crate. Ferris came in behind me and positioned herself 4 meters back and to my right, moving slowly, board in hand, not making herself large. The drift was arranged along the far wall, in that low, attentive stillness I'd seen the night before. The Skarath in the center. I'd started thinking of it as the lead one, though Ferris later told me their social hierarchy in the juvenile phase was more fluid than that implied. Turned its amber eyes toward me. I nodded at it. Not for any tactical reason, just because it seemed rude not to acknowledge something that was looking at me. The lead Skarath tilted its head about 15 degrees. It looked like a dog hearing an unusual sound. Easy, I said. The drift settled. Not all at once. It happened in a cascade. The lead Skarath first, then the other 3, then the Vol dropping its head, then a clicking sound from somewhere that slowed and softened into something almost rhythmic. The Thren appeared from behind a support column and picked its way toward me on its 6 limbs, stopped about 2 meters away, and sat. It looked at me with its faceted eyes and clicked twice slowly. Ferris, behind me, was very quiet. I could hear her making notes on her board. I sat on the crate for 20 minutes, while Ferris conducted behavioral observations at a distance that would have been impossible with any of the 4 handler teams. She got visual assessments on all 6 animals, documented the subsonic pulse patterns of the Scareth cluster, got a body condition reading on the vol, and noted the thren's clicking pattern in detail. She was thorough and unhurried. The drift remained still throughout. At one point, the vole stood up, crossed the bay, and lay down about 1.5 meters from my crate. Nobody had asked it to do this. It simply repositioned itself the way a dog repositions itself when it wants to be closer to a person it trusts, and it put its 2 large head down on its forepaws and looked at me from that distance and blinked once slowly. I didn't touch it. Ferris hadn't said I could, and I wasn't going to push my luck. But I looked at it and I said quietly, "Good." The vole's stub of a tail. Vole tails were docked short in the juvenile phase, a species characteristic. Something anyone had done to it. Twitched once. The thren clicked something new. Ferris's pen on her board went very fast for about 10 seconds. We exited after 24 minutes. Varus was waiting. The corridor had acquired more people than had been there when we went in. I counted 9, including Pelladara, who had apparently stopped pretending to check a manifest panel and was now just standing there openly. Ferris handed Varus her assessment board. "Full behavioral baseline on all 6 animals," she said. "The Scareth cluster is in excellent condition. Better than the pre-transit baseline I'd expect, frankly. The vole is slightly underweight but within normal range and gaining. The thren is," she paused, "communicating something. I'm not sure what. The pattern it was producing is not threat-coded." "And the handler access problem?" Ferris looked at me. "I'm not a handler," I said. "No." Ferris agreed. "But the animals have clearly established a reference anchor. That is not nothing." She said it to Varus, but she was still looking at me. "In multi-species juvenile groups under stress, and this group is under stress, they've been in an anomalous combined housing situation for 6 days. They will sometimes align around a single environmental constant. Usually it's a smell or a sound. In this case, it appears to be a person." "A cargo coordinator," Varus said. "A cargo coordinator," Ferris confirmed, without particular emphasis. "What does the thren's clicking mean?" one of the technicians asked. It was the younger one. Bren had been watching the whole session from the gallery. Ferris considered this. "My best current interpretation is that it is characterizing the situation for the rest of the group. A running commentary." She looked at her board. "Whether favorably or unfavorably, I cannot say with certainty. But the Scareth's response to it has been consistently one of reduced threat display." So she tucked the board under her arm. "Favorably, probably." We stood in the corridor for a moment. I could hear the drift through the bay door. Not the sustained low vocalization of a stressed animal, just the ambient sounds of something alive and settled in a space. A shift of weight, a soft bone plate rustle. The quarantine cleared 30 hours later. The Scareth transfer to their destination carrier was scheduled for the following morning. The vole's carrier pickup was 12 hours after that. The thren's research facility transport was last, a full day behind the vole. Sent me a comm at the 20th hour. Transfer prep required the animals to be moved to loading cradles, required handler access to the bay for the cradle installation. He asked if I would be willing to be present in the bay during the installation. I said I would. We did the Scareth cradle installation that evening. Ferris ran the handler team, 3 people, from the 4 previous teams, all briefed on the situation. I sat on my crate. The drift did not interfere with the installation. The Scareth watched the handlers with their amber eyes but did not raise their bone crest plates and did not move toward anyone. The vole watched from the center of the bay. The thren sat on my crate about 1 meter to my right and clicked occasionally, and one of the handlers, Bren, the young fauna tech, barely passed his certification, stopped and stared at it for a moment before Ferris put a hand on his shoulder and said, quietly, "Continue." About 10 minutes in, the lead Scareth walked across the bay, slowly and deliberately, and stopped in front of my crate. It looked up at me. Its bone crest plates were fully flat. It held that position for perhaps 30 seconds, amber eyes steady. and then it turned and walked back to its position near the loading cradles. Ferris made a note. Bren, behind her, was watching the Scareth with his mouth slightly open. I felt, not for the first time, that I was missing something that was obvious to everyone with Fauna Division training. The other three Scareth had watched the lead one cross the bay without moving, and when it returned they adjusted their positions slightly. A half-step right, turn, and settled into a new arrangement that I could not have described precisely, but that felt, somehow resolved. What was that? I asked Ferris later when the installation was done and the team was packing up. Social acknowledgement, she said. A Scareth juvenile, it reads as something between a check-in and an introduction. As if it was showing you to the handlers. She paused. Showing the handlers to you. The directionality in Scareth's social acknowledgement is ambiguous in the literature. Either way, it knew the handlers were there. Oh, it knew the handlers were there from the moment they entered, Ferris said. It was assessing whether you were comfortable with them. When it judged that you were, it told the rest of the group. I thought about this. That's why they didn't react to the handler team, I said. That is my interpretation, yes. She closed her assessment board. You may be considerably more embedded in this group's social structure than either of us realized when we started. She said it neutrally, as a professional observation, the way she said most things. But there was something behind it. Not concern exactly, and not wonder exactly. That I sat with on the walk back to the coordination office. The gallery had 23 people in it the following morning. I counted them through the window on my way in. I know 23 is a specific number, and that it is unusual to count. I counted because Varys had calmed me that morning to inform me, with careful professional tact, that the ongoing presence of non-essential personnel in the observation gallery was creating a distraction, and that he had issued a reminder to Fauna Division staff about gallery access protocols. He had not notably sent anyone away. He had issued a reminder. The distinction, I felt, was meaningful. 23 people. 2 of them I had never seen before, and whose station assignments I could not immediately identify. One of them had a documentation tablet and was recording sensor readings. None of them were looking at the sensor readings. The installation took 40 minutes in total. It should have taken 20. But Ferris ran it, slow and careful, and nobody rushed anything. And when it was done, all 6 animals were settled, and the handlers exited without incident. In the observation gallery above, see at least 14 people watching. The number had been growing all day. Word had gotten out. I became aware, sometime during that second day, that my presence in Bay 11 Cordon had acquired a name. I did not give it this name. I want to be clear about that. I would not have chosen to name it anything. But Bren, the young fauna tech, had apparently mentioned to someone in the Fauna Division's break room that the drift had been referred to by Ferris as establishing a reference, anchor, and someone, I never found out who, had taken that phrase and turned it into something the Fauna Division staff started using in their comms. Anchor Drift Protocol. I found out about Anchor Drift Protocol when Seal the contractor used the phrase in the observation gallery on the 3rd day, and I had to ask what they were talking about. That's what they're calling it, Seal said, gesturing at the window. At the bay below, where I had been sitting for the previous 40 minutes while Ferris ran another assessment pass. What you do? I sit on a crate, I said. The Anchor Drift Protocol, Seal said, with an expression that was not quite a smile but was adjacent to one. I did not find this particularly funny, but it was not the last time I heard the phrase. The next morning, I went in with Ferris, again to begin the pre-transfer checks. The gallery had 17 people in it by the time we finished. Pelladara was there. 2 off-duty engineering crew were there. The station's assistant quartermaster, a stocky woman named Vel Herrick, who had no plausible fauna-related reason to be in the observation gallery, pressed against the window watching the ride on top of the Vawool, as if this were something she needed to personally verify. The Scareth transferred on schedule. Ferris ran the movement with 3 handlers and me, and the 4 juveniles walked to their cradles in the kind of orderly, unhurried progression that had apparently never happened in the previous 2 days of attempts without me present. The cradles sealed, the transfer cart rolled. The Scareth were gone. The bay felt different after that. quieter, in a way that was not just the absence of 4 sets of bone plate shifting. The vole sat in the center of the bay and looked at the place where the scareth had been for a long time. I sat on my crate. I did not know what you said to a canine-coated predator juvenile who was watching the space where its pack had been. I did not say anything for a while. Then I said quietly, "I know." The vol looked at me. I said, "You've got 12 more hours." The vol dropped its chin onto its forepaws and lay there, and the thren came from wherever it had been and positioned itself on the crate beside me, not touching me, but close enough that I could feel the faint warmth the crystalline carapace apparently retained, and clicked softly, irregularly, and I sat there with them both for longer than I had intended. The gallery above was quiet. I could not see up into it from the bay floor, but I had learned by then that it was rarely empty when I was in Bay 11 cordon, and I had learned to be indifferent to that. Whatever was being watched and whoever was watching it, the thing happening in the bay was between me and the 2 animals left in it, and that was enough. The thren shifted on the crate and clicked a long, slow sequence I hadn't heard before. Something in it had a different quality, less the alert pattern, less the commentary rhythm it used when Ferris was running assessments. Slower, more considered, maybe. I had no way to know what it was communicating, or whether it was communicating anything at all in the way I understood. Communication. But it clicked its long, slow sequence in the quiet of the empty Scareth Bay, and then it went still, and the wall at my feet made a single soft sound like a breath let out slowly. And I sat there until Ferris came to tell me my presence was needed at the freight coordination office for an actual work-related reason. It was on my way out that I ran into Varus. He was in the corridor outside Bay 11 cordon with 2 people I didn't know. Tall alien in a Fauna Division contractor uniform, species unfamiliar to me, with a long face, and 4 upper limbs folded in what I would later learn was the IFTA posture of formal review, and a human woman in station administration gray, who had the look of someone from the compliance office. I knew the compliance office look. I had dealt with the compliance office twice in my freight coordination career, and both times had involved paperwork that outlasted the original by several months. "Oral," Varus said. He had the data pad again. "These are representatives from the Interstation Fauna Transit Authority. They have reviewed the incident logs from Bay 11 cordon over the past 5 days." I looked at the compliance woman. The presence of an uncertified individual in a restricted fauna holding area is a code violation under IFTA Transit Regulation 7.14, the compliance woman said, regardless of outcome. I reported the first entry as an accidental entry related to a manifest discrepancy, I said. The subsequent entries were not accidental. The subsequent entries were at Director Varus's request, I said. I looked at Varus. Varus had the expression of a man who had perhaps not anticipated this particular development. He was looking at a point slightly above my left shoulder. "Be that as it may," the compliance woman said, "the IFTA requires that any individual conducting behavioral interface with Category 2 or higher transit fauna hold a current fauna interface certification. Mr. Oral does not hold such a certification. Going forward, his access to Bay 11 cordon must be suspended pending a formal review." I looked at the data pad in her hands. Then I looked at Varus, who was still not meeting my eyes, and at the 4-limbed IFTA contractor, who was looking at me with an expression that communicated something, but nothing I could read clearly. "Understood," I said. I went to the freight coordination office, finished my shift, and went to my bunk. I found out about the extraction attempt 4 hours later. Ferris came to me. She was for Ferris agitated. Ferris was not a person who easily showed agitation, so the fact that it was visible in her told me something about how the preceding 90 minutes had gone. "Varus sent a team into the bay," she said. "Standard extraction prep. They needed to move the vole to a loading cradle for tomorrow's transfer. I know about the transfer. The drift is refusing access." I sat up on my bunk. "The Scareth transferred fine." "You were in the bay for the Scareth transfer." Ferris paused. "The vole and the thren are showing a different response pattern than the Scareth did. The Scareth were pack-bonded to each other, merrily. The vole and the thren appear to have bonded primarily to you." She said this plainly, without apology, the way she said most things. "Vole is not responding to handler approach." The Thren has positioned itself on the loading cradle and is not moving. When the handlers attempt to move toward either animal, the Vol stands between them and the cradle. What does Varus want? Varus has suspended your access per the IFTA compliance review. He is currently attempting to conduct the extraction using deterrent protocols. Pause. He has been attempting for 90 minutes. Has anyone been hurt? No. The Vol is not charged or attacked. It positions itself and it holds its position. It is not aggressive in the threat display sense. It is simply. Ferris paused. And I thought I heard some in her voice that in another context might have been reluctant admiration. Present. Immovably present. Every time a handler takes a step toward the cradle, the Vol takes a step toward the handler. When the handler stops, the Vol stops. When the handler retreats, the Vol holds its position. It has been doing this for 90 minutes. And it is not tiring. I got up and got dressed. The situation when I arrived at Bay 11 cordon was more complicated than Ferris had described, which was impressive because she had described it fairly completely. There were 6 people in the corridor outside the bay. Varus, 2 handlers with deterrent equipment, the compliance woman from earlier, the 4-limbed IFTA contractor, and Seal appeared to have followed events here out of professional documentation instinct. The observation gallery above had people in it I could hear through the ventilation, murmurs. The shuffle of feet on the narrow walkway, someone asking a quiet question. I could hear the Vol through the door. It wasn't snarling. It was making a low sound that was not quite a growl and not quite a vocalization, just a pressure in the air that you felt in your jaw. Threat, not aggression. Something between a statement and a question. The thread was clicking, fast, sustained, and what I had come to recognize in the previous 3 days as its alert pattern. Not distress, precisely, but heightened, watching. Varus saw me in the corridor, and his face did something complicated, cycling through several expressions in the space of about 2 seconds before, settling on a kind of controlled neutrality that cost him something. Your access is suspended, he said. I know. The IFTA. I know what the IFTA said. I looked at the bay door. How long has the Vol been maintaining that position? Approximately 90 minutes. That's a stress vocalization, Ferris said from behind me. She had apparently also followed events here. I was beginning to understand that Ferris went where the animals were, regardless of what the corridor population was doing. Extended periods in that state are documented to cause cortisol cascades in Vol that can complicate recovery and acclimation at the destination. Transfer window is in 8 hours. If the animal is in cortisol cascade at transfer, the destination handlers will be managing a stressed Vol for several days minimum. Varus was silent. The Thren, Ferris continued, has not moved from the loading cradle in 90 minutes. Attempts to relocate it have resulted in the Vol stepping toward the handler each time. Not charging, stepping. The team has not been able to safely approach the cradle. The compliance woman said, the regulation, Ferris said, and there was something in her voice that was quiet and very final, exists to protect the animals and the handlers. I am telling you as the senior assessment specialist on this facility that the regulation as currently applied is producing an outcome in direct conflict with both of those goals. Silence in the corridor. I looked at Varus. He was a by-the-book man in a situation where the book had run out of pages, and I could see in his face the exact moment he acknowledged that to himself. It was not a comfortable moment for him. I did not enjoy watching it. Could go in, I said. Get the Thren off the cradle, give them something to settle on, let the handlers do the installation. Varus looked at the compliance woman. The compliance woman looked at her data pad. The 4-limbed IFTA contractor looked at the bay door, then at Varus, then at me, with the expressions of someone who has been reviewing incident logs and is now watching the incident logs become current, if you go in. The compliance woman said slowly, we will need to log it as a continued protocol deviation and the review period will be extended. How long is the review period currently? I said, 6 to 8 weeks. And if the Vol doesn't transfer in the morning, transfer window is mandated. The animal will transfer regardless. In cortisol's cascade, she didn't answer. The low sound from behind the bay door continued. It was, I had decided, a question. The same question it had been asking for 90 minutes. I did not know exactly what the question was, but I knew it was not aggression, and I knew it was directed at the door. Varus looked at the bay door, then at his datapad, then at me. I watched him make a decision, and then unmake it, and then make it again. He was a careful, documentation-first man, and being documentation-first was about to cost him a healthy animal transfer record and a clean station compliance report, and he knew it. And standing there in the corridor with 12 people, watching from the gallery above, and the Vol holding position behind the door, he made his choice. Go in. His voice was level and did not waver. Handle the Vol situation. The handlers will install the cradle once the animal allows access. You're authorizing. I am authorizing a single continuation of the behavioral interface protocol for the purpose of completing a transfer preparation. He looked at the compliance woman, and the look was not unkind, but it was not soft. Document it as you need to document it. That is my call, and I will stand behind it. The compliance woman made a note on her datapad. She said nothing else. The IFTA contractor's forearms rearranged themselves slightly. I would learn much later that in their species, this gesture indicated something between acknowledgement and changed assessment. At the time I just noticed it and filed it and thought it was a long day. Varus looked at me just for a moment, while the compliance woman was writing and the contractor was rearranging its arms. Varus looked at me directly. See? And there was something in his face that was not quite an apology and not quite gratitude, but was somewhere in the territory between them. He was a documentation man, and the documentation had run out of road. He had made his call, and he was going to live with the paper trail, and the look he gave me said that he understood something he had not understood 3 days ago. And that understanding had cost him something, and he was okay with that. I nodded at him. He nodded back. That was all. I went in. The bay was dim. The lights had been cycling to low in the evening period, and nobody had overridden them. The Vol was in the center of the bay, between me and the loading cradle. The Thren was on top of the cradle, clicking at its alert pace. The Vol had its head up and its too large chest facing the door, and when I came in, its eyes moved to me. The low sustained sound stopped, not gradually. It stopped when I came through the door, the way a noise stops when you find the switch. One moment it was there, filling the bay, and the next it was gone, and the bay was quiet except for the Thren clicking. And then the Thren's clicking slowed too, one beat at a time, down to the soft irregular rhythm I had come to recognize as its settled pace. I crossed the bay slowly and sat on my crate. The Vol looked at me for a long moment. Then it crossed the bay. Not in the cautious handler watching patrol it had been running for 90 minutes, but in a direct unhurried line, and lay down beside the crate. Its shoulder was against my leg. It was warm and heavy, and the warmth went through the fabric of my oversuit immediately. I know, I said. I know. The Scarith are gone and now you're going too, and that is genuinely a lot for 12 hours. The Vol put its chin on the crate edge beside my knee. It was heavy enough that it moved the crate slightly, and I braced my feet and let it. The Thren clicked once, slowly, and stepped off the loading cradle. It walked across the bay and sat beside the Vol, and looked at me with its faceted eyes and clicked twice more, at the slow, deliberate pace. The cradle is not a bad thing, I said. The cradle goes somewhere good. You're going to be fine. I was talking to a predator juvenile that outweighed me considerably and had just spent 90 minutes holding off a handler team, and I was explaining the concept of travel to it in simple sentences. In the observation gallery above, the murmurs had gone quiet. 10 or 15 people pressed against the glass in complete silence. I signaled Ferris through my comm. The handler team came in. They moved slowly, professionally, no sudden gestures, the way Ferris had trained them. The Vol watched them from its position beside my crate. It did not stand. It did not move toward them. It tracked them with its eyes, amber eyes steady. No bone plate to raise, but the fur along its spine did not ridge, and it stayed. The Thren watched from beside the Vol, clicking at intervals that slowed and steadied as the installation progressed. The cradle installation took 16 minutes. When the team brought the cradle forward, the Thren stood up and walked to the far side of the crate and sat behind me, out of the way, as if it had decided to give the handlers the space they needed to work. The Vol watched the cradle placement with focused attention, but did not interfere. When the installation was done, I stood up. The vole stood when I did. The thren stood. I walked toward the door and I stopped, because I was not certain I was going to get another chance, and I was not certain what to do with that. I turned back. The vole was standing in the center of the bay watching me. The thren was beside it, faceted eye on me, and one on the loading cradle with its sealed components. Good, I said. You are both very good. The vole held still. It did not break eye contact. The thren clicked twice. The slow, deliberate pair that I had heard enough times now to feel fairly confident meant something specific, though I did not know what. I walked out. In the corridor, nobody said anything for a moment. Then the compliance woman, without looking up from her datapad, said, "That will be logged as a single continuance behavioral interface event, under Director Varus's discretionary authority." "Thank you," Varus said, and his voice was entirely even. The transfer went smoothly the next morning, was present in the bay. Varus had signed off on a final single continuance authorization, and the vol walked to its cradle with the unhurried steadiness of an animal that has decided a thing is acceptable. The thren rode on top of the vole for the last 3 meters to the loading cart, which I had not expected, but Ferris took in stride, noting it on her board with the same even pen strokes she used for everything. When the cradles sealed, I stood in the bay and listened to the loading cart roll. The thren transferred separately the following day. It came to its cradle without incident, walking across the bay from its position near the support column, where it had spent the night. At the door to the loading cart, it stopped and looked back at me. It clicked once. Then it walked in. I stood in Bay 11 cordon alone for about 10 minutes. It was a freight bay. Plain walls, loading track, sensor array. Nothing remarkable about it. It smelled faintly of the animals that had been there. Something warm and dusty and slightly electric. The way the air smells after a long rain or after something with a heartbeat has spent time breathing in a closed space. I went back to work. The IFTA compliance review took 3 weeks, and I spent most of it processing manifests at the coordination office. Was my actual job, and had fallen behind during the Bay 11 cordon period, in ways that took considerable effort to untangle. Varus filed his documentation clearly and in detail, including the timeline, the 4 failed handler team outcomes, the behavioral data Ferris had collected across 6 sessions, and a section titled Operational Necessity Justification that used careful regulatory language to explain why a cargo coordinator had been authorized to enter a restricted fauna bay repeatedly over 4 days. The section was thorough and honest, and made no attempt to obscure what had happened or what decision Varus had made in the corridor when the vole had been holding its position for 90 minutes. The compliance woman reviewed it. The 4-limbed IFTA contractor reviewed it. Ferris submitted her full behavioral assessment as supporting documentation. 46 pages. I later read 7 of, before the technical language defeated me, though the summary was clear enough. Multi-species juvenile predator groups, under transit stress, sometimes establish an anchoring attachment to a stable environmental presence, with measurable effects on threat display reduction and handler access. The effect appeared to be strongest in groups experiencing anomalous combined species housing. The report recommended further study. At the end of 3 weeks, the review board issued a formal finding. The continued access had constituted a protocol deviation. Varus had acted within his discretionary authority in authorizing it. No further action was recommended for any party involved, and 1 paragraph at the end, dry and formal, the review board's equivalent of a raised eyebrow, noted that the behavioral outcomes observed were of potential research interest and recommended that the Fauna Division compile a full report. Ferris had already compiled the full report. She had started it on day 2. Someone in the Fauna Division had named the thing anyway. Anchor drift protocol had been in informal use since the 3rd day, and it stayed in informal use. And when I passed Fauna Division staff in the station corridors, some of them nodded at me with a particular expression. The look people give something they have witnessed and are not entirely sure how to file. Pel Adara bought me a meal in the break room and didn't say much, which was the most comfortable conversation I had during those 3 weeks. I filed my request for a temporary accommodation transfer on the last day of the review period. Waystation Pellucid's freight surge was ongoing, and I had 8 weeks of coordination work ahead of me before the next rotation, and the standard accommodations block had a wait list that stretched 3 weeks. Bay 11 cordon was empty, had a functional climate system, a power outlet, and floor space adequate for a cot. Varus received the request and held it for 3 days. I suspect he spent those 3 days looking at the request on his screen, and considering whether it was something he was willing to approve and what it would mean if he did and what the IFTA compliance record would say about a bay to accommodation reassignment for a cargo coordinator who had spent previous 2 weeks sitting on a crate talking to predators. Then he approved it with a notation. Bay 11 cordon temporary accommodation, non-standard, approved on operational basis. Occupant to be informed that any future fauna transit assignments to this bay will require standard handler access protocols to be observed. I moved a cot in that afternoon. It was a freight bay with plain walls and a loading track and a sensor array and a power outlet, and it smelled, still, faintly of the animals that had been there. I don't know how to explain why that mattered. It just did. I slept better there than I had in 3 weeks. The manifest discrepancies don't resolve themselves. Cascade errors in weight logs don't find themselves. Somebody has to sit with the numbers and find where the chain broke. That is still my actual job, and I am still doing it. And when the next freight surge ends and the rotation comes, I will move to wherever the work takes me. And Bay 11 cordon will go back to being a freight bay with no particular distinction. About a week after the Thren transferred, I was in the coordination office, working through a backlog when Bren, the young fauna tech, knocked on the doorframe. He had something in his hand, a printed sheet, which was unusual because the fauna division did almost everything on boards and tablets. He held it out. Ferris wanted you to have this before she shipped out. It was a still frame from the observation gallery sensor footage. Bay 11 cordon, looking down me on the crate. In the dim evening light, the vole beside me, with its chin on the crate edge, the Thren on the crate to my right. Drift, what remained of it, arranged around me in the low settled quiet of the last night before the transfer. I looked at it for a while. She said to tell you, Bren said with the slightly formal manner of someone delivering a message carefully, that she has conducted behavioral assessments on Category 2 fauna at 11 different stations. She said that in 11 stations, she has seen the anchoring attachment documented in the literature 3 times. She said the other 2 times, handlers' weeks and formal bonding protocols to establish. He paused. She said the literature calls it a rare behavioral artifact. She said she wanted you to know that. Thank you, I said. Bren nodded and left. Shh. I looked at the still frame for another minute and then put it down and went back to the weight logs. Ferris left a copy of her report on my cot before she shipped out to Korath Outpost to follow up on the Thren's research placement. On the first page, in the margin beside the summary paragraph, in her careful, precise handwriting, she had written 3 words. You were enough. I have kept that page. It is folded in my manifest kit between the calibration notes and the emergency contact list, and it has been there since Pellucid. And it will probably stay there until the kit finally falls apart from use.